first of all, thank you everybody for joining us. I've got Craig McClelland here, COO and Vice President of Better Homes and Gardens Metro Brokers, and I myself, Mike Feller from ActivePipe. While we're going through this, for those of you guys who have joined us, if you don't mind in the chat section, just kind of telling us who you are, where you're from, whether you're an agent, a broker, et cetera. That way we can, cater the conversation accordingly. That would be awesome. So, when you come in, even just throw in the chat, and then we'll open up questions later on. But I guess in the meantime, Craig, obviously I'm doing a half-baked job of introducing yourself. Love to, kind of give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit about where you're coming from both the Metro Broker side of things, but also on a personal level, because you and I have talked about this, and I think you've got a really unique story. So I'd love to at least start there. Just kind of, you take the floor here. You'll do a much better job than I can.
So you want me to go like chronologically?
Greg, one of the things I've always valued about you is, with your the way you think about things. I think you've got a very unique background. So, I think I'll leave that to you. I think it's important for everybody here to kind of hear your story, just tee up the conversation.
So I'll rock through it really, really fast. See some awesome companies up there. I know a lot of those companies are fantastic organizations. So I'll give you my backstory really quick. I grew up in upstate New York. We didn't have much money. I didn't taste really true milk. I had powdered milk for many years of my life. If anybody's ever dealt with that, I think I was like 15 before I had regular milk. I was blown away at how horrible it was. I just thought powdered milk was the way to go. But anyway, so we moved to Atlanta, Georgia. My family moved me down here. My dad had a job down here. When I was in high school, I was 17 years old. My mother and father got a divorce. My dad moved in with his girlfriend. He sent me the mortgage. It was $780. And I opened up the mortgage. I remember like opening it up and being like, "Hey Dad, where do you want me to send this? Like, so you can pay the mortgage." He goes, "Well, pay it or get out." So then I calculated like the cost of utilities and everything. And I decided like, I can't live in this house anymore because it was a 4-bedroom house. I was a senior in high school. I was partying like crazy. I realized I could not foot the bills. So then I had to move out of the house. So I had an uncle in Raleigh, North Carolina that had a franchise called Rubberwall. And so I decided to get in my 86 Isuzu Impulse and drive to Raleigh, North Carolina. Because I figured I'd have this, I get to sit on the throne of this franchise and I'd have all these people work for me. It'd be amazing. Come to find out that a franchise just meant we had the rights to the territory. So we had no business, no employees, no jobs, no customers, no nothing. So we had a truck with parts in it. So for the next 4 months, I lived in my 86 Isuzu Impulse and put together the company, the trucks, the partners, the customer base, like everything. We sold it in 18 months. I got a good chunk of money out of it, came back to Georgia. I thought I was wealthy and would never have to work again in my life, which was not true. It was exactly the opposite of that. And so then I started buying rental houses. I opened a woodworking company and ended up, while I was buying the house, I decided I needed to go ahead and get my real estate license because I had a buddy of mine that was probably bottom 1% of my class in graduating. And he was getting these $5,000 checks every time I did a closing on these rental houses. So I realized that I probably needed that. So I went through the online program. This is back, a couple decades ago, that I did the online studying, the 75 hours of pre-license, did the test, got my license, started selling, quit my job at Pepsi. I thought it'd be great to be a real estate agent. I thought people would just flock to me, which was very hard work, unbelievably so. And so I was knocking on a lot of doors and building my business, got in a spat with my broker, like happens sometimes. I was with a really small firm. So I spooled out my 9th month of business and started my own company. So in 2007, I had 23 offices, 1,100 agents, and sold that. I reverse engineered, sold that back to the brokers, and then joined Metro Brokers, did strategic growth and operations for Metro Brokers. So I would do mergers and acquisitions. And so here I was, like I had sold for about 10 years in the field, doing about 120 units a year. So I was a high producer, built the company, sold the company as an independent company, and then came to Metro Brokers to do M&As. So I understood the structure of an M&A. I understood franchise agreements. I understood all these components and was successful in doing that. Spooled in about 23 companies in 24 months and brought them into Metro Brokers and then moved forward to actually take over different departments in the company, became the COO, became the vice president, became one of the owners of the company. So that's kind of where I am today. So we're 26 locations, 2,500 agents. We whole own our mortgage company, our title company, our insurance company. So those all whole owned. And then we have an academy. We enroll about 3,000 people annually into the academy for pre-licensed schooling. And that's probably one of our #1 sources of recruiting. And we do a lot of unique, fun stuff. We operate a little bit different. I don't have brokers in the branches. We really run a different, unique model. We're very departmentalized. So I have departments that specialize in certain operational components of the business, and it allows us to really refine those pieces of the business and run with them. But just, a fairly unique operation. But we, if you took us and compared us to other companies, we're also very traditional. We have splits. We do have a cap. I have onboarding programs. I do a lot of company gen business. So that does that give you a good launch pad? Is that good enough?
Oh, that's great,
you want
man.
me to go further back?
No,
I
this
had a
is great.
1972 Chevrolet pickup truck that I was restoring when I was 16 years old, and I decided to change out the washer, reservoir, the pump, the lines, and me and my buddy drank too much for 16-year-olds, and when I was changing them out, instead of running them back to the windshield wipers, we decided to reroute the line down to the glove compartment, and we used to run alcohol through it. So I had the coolest truck in high school, because whenever you saw my windshield wipers going during a sunny day, it's because my buddy was sitting there with a McDonald's cup filling it with Jack Daniels. So I think that sums everything up into one.
Greg, I tell you what, that's a good transition right there. No, I appreciate that. Look, I mean, having come from a business background myself, and certainly been in the startup space for a while, I'm always interested to hear, about the entrepreneur behind this stuff, because I would imagine, and what I'd love to actually ask you without making any assumptions, like, how was that experience? So you've obviously got a tremendous story there, but how has that shaped, the way you approach, business now, even in the real estate space? I mean, it has to have had an effect on what you're doing now and how you run your business.
I think that, it has, but when you're on the inside of it, you don't see it. It's just natural. But, the reality is, and what I always encourage everybody is, there's always these challenges in life, but the reality is you've got to be okay with failing. You got to be okay with forging ahead. And because it's the only way you find the successes. I'm reading with my agents a book called Rhinoceros Success. I don't know if you've ever seen the book before, but I read this like every 90 days. It's a fun, super cheesy read by Scott Alexander. And it's just about like the difference between a rhinoceros and a cow. And a cow just lets things happen to them, and a rhinoceros forges ahead. You don't mess with a rhino. So I think that, if you look at the things that happened in life, the way that I process is a direct result of like being kicked out on my butt without a plan B plenty of times. So I'm really like, how I operate nowadays, I never have a plan B. There's never a fallback plan. There's never we're going to do this and we're going to figure out how to do it. And we're going to be so immersed in it that we're going to figure out how to get to the end result. There's no other option, right?
Yeah.
I think when you operate that way, I think there's a lot to be said about that.
Yeah, no, totally. And what's interesting, I mean, Craig, you and I have talked about this, and this is probably a good segue now into the meat of the discussion. I know that today we're going to talk about how do we turn some of these dead leads into dollars, and how do we convert, and how do we think about using data. But, one of the things, even before we get into some specifics there, one of the things that you've mentioned to me previously around, these moments of crisis and some things that kind of surface around evolution. Can you speak to that a little bit to help kind of set a foundation there to the broader discussion?
Yeah, so I'll give you I know this is not about the COVID story, but I think that the COVID story that we're writing right now, or we're living through, is there's a brilliant thing happening around it. And the brilliant thing around it is that, evolution happens in times of crises. So because it's necessity, like when we're out there and we're forging ahead and we have a great company and we're getting in front of the crowd and we're saying, hey, we're up 5%. We don't finish that sentence by saying we're up 5%. Let's figure out a new way of doing it. Like, let's figure out a way of implementing Zoom or figure out a way of doing virtual open house. You say we're up 5%, keep doing what you're doing. Like that's how it works. But when you're in a time of crisis or necessity, you find new ways of doing things. And the funny thing is we adopt realities that were sitting right there in front of us out of necessity. Because we can't meet someone in person, we have to leverage Zoom and platforms like this. But what other way did you have to communicate so brilliantly? I launched a program with my company and just decided to take on the challenge. I said, you know what, this is going to be interesting. We don't know what our Corona story reads like until we live through it. So what we're going to do is we're going, for the next 45 days, I'm going to jump on Zoom at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to be on for 30 minutes. And whoever wants to jump on with me, we're going to go over numbers. We're going to go over stats. We're going to talk reality. We're going to talk numbers of the company. I don't even care. We're going to have challenges. We're going to have fun. And for 45 days, every single day, including weekends, we're getting on it. Because if you can do it, I can do it. If you can do it on weekends, I can do it. I don't even care. Like, so that's what we did for 45 days. And we wrapped up on Thursday. And we had 700 people on Thursday, 670, something like that. Our peak during that run was about 720. And our floor was about 300. And I pivoted it to every Tuesday that we're going to do this. And this morning I did one, and I had 475 people on. But what a brilliant way to interact. What a brilliant way to launch new tools and resources and understandings. We read 6 different books. It just really nurtured our culture. So it's amazing how we embrace it. But here's what happens is, you know, when you're sitting there and you're going to war, and the enemy is coming over the crest of the hill, and they all are equipped with guns, and we're all standing there with bow and arrows. That's the moment then we go, hey guys, maybe we should get our guns out, because this is going to be a gunfight. You know, and that's kind of how this goes. It's like, this was an opportunity going, hey, either you're gonna shut down during this crisis, this pandemic that's coming out, and you're going to choose not to operate, or you're going to get out your Zoom, or you're going to get out your Google meetings, or you're going to get out ways to function and operate, and you're going to be better off for it. So today our conversation was looking at all the tech that we implemented that we're going to keep in place. Like, we weren't using it just for that moment. We're better off for it. So agents that decided to hibernate for 2 or 3 months, like, literally are going to come back out to a totally different industry. Like, it's going to look different. It's going to feel different. It's going to operate different. Like, consumers are eventually going to go, why can't you just meet me on Zoom? Why isn't there a virtual open house? Why can't you walk through? Why is there not video on this listing? Like, I mean, those kinds of things. And agents that just decided to step out are going to be taken back, because either they're going to have to figure out how to adapt really quick and adopt really quick. Otherwise, they're going to become obsolete. Like, that's how it happens. So anyways, I think that we're at a brilliant moment of adoption that's happening at a rate that we've always been capable of. We just haven't had the focus, the moment of focus to do it, because we were distracted with business, right? Rightfully so. We were distracted being in the trenches, and I totally get that. Yeah, so we have this adoption that's happening. So I'm really excited about some of the stuff that's going on in the industry.
Yeah, totally. Look, sorry.
No, I think that's a perfect segue into, like, data, kind of like what this conversation is about. And I've been on tons of panels, and with my history, I've always been a really good student of technology. I love tech, right? Sometimes to my detriment, because I get the coolest stuff, the fastest stuff. I download 30 apps in a month and I delete 28 of them. Like, I just like seeing how things function. That's just how I process. I'm operationally, that's just how I'm wired. And I've always been a big advocate of the reality of, like, data has to take this big jump that's going to happen, because we've been watching for a decade companies come into the space and leverage data, and they're leveraging data to mature it and sell it back to brokerages and agents with referral fees on them. And that's a good business practice. I'm not even saying that's a bad business practice. I think what Zillow built is great. I have shares in Zillow. Like, I invest in Zillow. I invest in Realogy. I invest in a lot of the different companies. A lot of them are great organizations because they go ahead and meet where the need is. But what companies are going to have to do is, we generate a lot of data internally, and we have to make the conscious decision. Either we're going to mature and work with the data internally with systems and tools that are at our fingertips, and we're going to say, hey, I'm going to take the obligation of taking a database and working a database and maturing the database to the point of the next sale, or the point of listing their home, or the point of buying another property, or whatever it is. And then I'm going to equip my agent with that piece of business as a lead, and I'm going to retain the referral fee. Otherwise, I'm going to be steered by buying that same data back from companies that are maturing that data, and they're selling it to my agents or to my brokers or whatever it is. And either scenario is good. You just got to know what the scenario is, because one scenario, your margins are getting thinner every day. The other scenario, you control the margins, right? So, like, you're staffing to it, and you have the technologies, and you have the resources, right? That you're staffing to that, so you can control what the returns are on that. But I'm a big fan of being in control. That's just how I've always run. So I run a lot of those databases, and I have been for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. Look, one of the things I've always appreciated about you there, Craig, is in addition to your really charming sense of humor, just the way you think about things here and everything. And I think it's interesting because, a lot of, we had a conversation a few weeks ago with Travis Saxon from T360. And one of the things that he mentioned that I thought was really interesting was that, consumers, they want insights. They don't want data. And so at the end of the day, our job, or your job as a brokerage, the agent, as a technology platform, is to how do we take that data and make it meaningful? How do you make it meaningful? How do you use the data to drive action? How do you use the data to drive those insights? For us as an email marketing platform, data is so core to what we do. Data really drives the type of content you can send to consumers, but it also drives, action, for the agents as well. I'm curious now to kind of take this to the next step here, Craig, and get this even a little bit more granular. Now, when you talk about data, and I love the way you think about this, how do you guys think about utilizing data when it comes to specifically around taking leads that maybe are a little bit colder, that maybe hadn't been as active in the recent time period? How do you guys use data or think about that and move them along closer to the transaction and think about converting those types of leads?
So I'm a big believer, and I think that it's interesting that, like, so many times we try to put this rigid definition on every point of data. Like we try to put these rigid, like, trajectories and workflows and, like, all these things or statuses on every single point of data that we have, when the reality is like a data point's a data point. So, like, I mean, literally, I have
Can you give us an example, Craig?
Yeah, I have this is what I'm building into. Like, I have a DPN system, and DPN is one of the oldest, financial systems in the real estate industry, and we've had it for a really long time. It's got a ton of data in it, but all those data points have relevance to them in some capacity. So if you think about it this way, it's like I have 2.5 million people in a company-driven database that I'm working all the time. And to your point that you just said, when are they worth working on? Well, I'm the opposite. I believe they're all worth working on all the time forever. Like, until somebody literally tells me, take me out of your database forever and never put me back in, like, it's almost impossible to figure out perfect timing. So, like, the trajectory has to be work everything all the time. Like, obviously there's different types and frequencies of work that you put on different types of data, but we spend too much time over analyzing that. All right, well, they bought a house, so we don't have to send them an email or a chat or a phone call or a text message for the next 7.5 years. Okay, well, that's dumb, because you don't know what's going to happen in their life in the next 7.5 years. And the 7 years is an average. It's a national average. So it's people that sell in 1 year or in 2 years or in a 1.5 years or in 6 months, or, like, they lose their job, they get pregnant and they want a larger house. There's all these things that happen, because the interesting thing about our data sets is they're driven by life, and you can't predict life. I mean, people buy and sell because they get married, they get a divorce, they have a kid, they become empty nesters, they retire, they get a new job, they get an increase in pay. Like, all these things are life events, and you can't quantify that. So the way you have to look at data is saying all data has value, and, like, how do I touch them all with a frequency that when they show any engagement, that I can escalate it to the point to where we make the phone call, we make a text message, we assign it to the right agent, and we meet them where they are. We meet the customer where they are, and we service them, because all this is about is a huge data lake of information and trying to identify who needs our service when. This is just customer service is all it is.
Totally.
That's just like, this is just a brilliant way of organizing and looking at a data lake of information and saying, all right, they're all relevant and they're all important. But when one of them pops their head up, that means they need a different level of service. So we'll provide them a different level of service. Maybe it's an email frequency that changes. Maybe it's a messaging that changes. Maybe it's a direct text message or a phone call that happens. And we keep on elevating them to the point of face-to-face meetings or to the appointment, right? And then we assign it to an agent. So, that's the way we quantify data and pull data apart, is that it all has relevancy. So if you take DPN, our service, and you say there was a closing that happened 14 years ago, right, on a $250,000 house or $650,000 house, whatever it is, like, they all have value, right? Everything should work. in some capacity. Because if you're not working it, I can guarantee you someone else is, right? That's the oldest saying in real estate, is that if they're not only in your database, they're in someone else's. So if you're not working it, someone else is. So the question is, who will be there at the right time? And we just want to be there more often. That's all.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So I want to dig into that a little bit further. Before I do that, just a reminder for those of you that may have joined a little bit later, if you don't mind, just in the chat section, just let us know kind of where you're from, with broker, agent, et cetera. That would be helpful for us, especially when we tee up some questions here at the end. So, Craig, can we take that? For those of the folks that are listening here, or folks that see this, are there, when you talk about data and the way you guys are thinking about segmenting your database and thinking about differently based on where the end consumer is, are there maybe one or two very tactical things that if somebody's not doing something now, that they should immediately start thinking about putting into practice tomorrow? What would something like that be that ties into what you're talking about, using these data points and how to kind of drive your business?
I would say that you have to decide what you can tackle first, right? So it depends on, it'll be different for everybody's organization, but there's a very defined funnel. Like the funnel is, soft touches with email, like broad emails to landing pages to, text messages to phone calls.
Sure.
And either you work backwards through that funnel, or you work broad up. There's one way or the other. So if you have the capacity to make phone calls, you need to call the ones that are most relevant. And most relevant would just be a timing thing. Like they dropped in our database now, so the time is now. We need to reach out and touch them, because running an organization, you need ROI on your product as quick as possible.
Sure.
If you have the capability of starting campaigns on large pools of data, then put the campaigns together and start those campaigns and nurture them up to those higher points of interactions, right? If you don't have a concierge system, if you don't have a call system in place, or you don't have the scripting and dialogues in place, then definitely start out with the emailing, campaigning scenario. The number one thing though is get a database, start compiling a database, because, and you have to think broad. I remember when I first got into coaching and I had, I was an agent, and my coach is telling me, how to start a business. I'm like, what do I do to make money? He goes, knock on doors. And I was like, great. And then so I went out and knocked on doors, and I didn't have scripts. I didn't know what I was doing. And, the next week he gives me the scripts. He's like, you really knocked on doors? I was like, yeah, you told me to. I didn't know what to say. I looked like an idiot. I set an appointment though, right? It took me a lot of doors and awkward conversations to get to the appointment. So he told me, he said, well, you got to build this database. I said, all right, well, who do I put in the database? Right? And he said, well, friends and family, put friends and family. So I overanalyze it. I put friends and family, but I only put the ones in that I think would sell with me or buy with me. And just the specific, ones that I thought would buy a house even, right?
Sure.
Would even have the money to buy a house. Right?
Yep.
So here I am with 12 people. And he goes, you're an idiot. You're going to fail. And I was like, well, I probably will, but it's due to your bad guidance. And he's like, look, this is what you need to do. He said, put all your friends and family, any one of them you can get a number, email address, or address to, put them all in there. I said, okay, then what I do? He says, then you put people in there you have commonalities with, they go to the same church, they're part of the same community groups that you have. He said, they shop at the same grocery store. He said, they live in the same county. They breathe the same air. And I was like, all right, now I'm starting to get it. I got to think really, really broad, and then the system I'll put in place will parse it down. He goes, yeah, he says, if you want to have returns, you have to have, and we all know these statements of, you got your C's, your B's, and your A's. He says, your C's have got to be broad. You got to have a large reach of what you control that you touch. And then with the messaging you're touching them with, you're moving them constantly to be your B's, and your B's are people that would refer you, right? And then your A's are people that would not only refer you, but would do business with you, right? So it's each one of them gets a different frequency. So you got to start with a database. So if there's lots of great ideas, and there's amazing Gantt charts and spreadsheets and all this stuff about how amazing it would be if I had 200,000 people. But until you gather the 200,000 people, there's no way for this great workflow to ever function. So I say, start with the database, and then look at the tools you have at hand. If you have a great call center and you have a concierge system, use it. Start banging out phone calls, and you'll start categorizing people and figuring out who really needs the service right now. And we're touching them, or we're refining our scripts, right? If it's the emailing system, then put an email system in place and build it out. Start out with some simple emails. Start out with some simple landing pages. The one thing is this, is don't get caught in analysis or paralysis by analysis, right?
Yep.
Like the old saying is don't get log jammed by paralysis by analysis, because you're overthinking everything. You're like, all right, we're going to launch this 2025, right? It's like, we're going to have it all built out and all this stuff. It's like, no, start now, get a database and start reaching out to them and touch them. Because I guarantee you there is a portion of that database that needs your services now.
Yeah, totally. So I two things I think that are really powerful out of that I heard. One, on your last point there, look, coming from a startup, I've always believed very strongly when you're 80% there, it's time to move, right? So things don't have to be perfect. Get something set up, get a system in place, and then you can always iterate and revise that over time. I think that's really important. I think one outtake there. The second piece of it is, I think it's so important, and I know we're certainly probably biased in this, but when you're talking a lot about databases here. And if you don't set up the right systems and processes in place around engaging with that database, if you don't do that from the outset and build off of that, if you're just trying to pour a bunch of leads down into that database, you've got a broken system and you're just going to have a ton of leakage. And so I love the way you're thinking about this around starting with the database, building the right systems and processes from there. So I think
that's where I think it's like super easy to quantify and take action on something when you say, hey, we're already doing brilliant emailing campaigning in the company. Why don't we build a database and start with that? We already got this great text messaging system with awesome scripts. Let's start with that. We got this amazing concierge system. We've already got the dialogues. We've got the timing as far as the phone calls and everything down. We'll start with that. So it allows you to start with what's natural and what the company is good at, and then you build out around that. But once you get the database, you have the original database in place. And the other piece that I would put in place is once you get a database, you have to have a systematic approach to growing your database. Like, how are you going to add to your database? Because, databases, it's not that they become stale, because if you're working them, I believe they stay lively, but you constantly have to have flows of data coming into it to grow that data.
Sure.
Like, you want to get to the point that you're a data ocean versus a data lake.
Absolutely. So, Craig, first of all, this is awesome. The time is flying by. I just looked up at the time. We're getting towards the end of this here. Before we open it up to questions, Craig, is there anything else like kind of related to this, or anything else separately that you want to share or kind of leave the audience with?
I would just say this is it's all right to be courageous enough to fail. Like this is something that is worth failing at. And it's worth failing at over and over and over again, because when it hits, like the ROI on it, the value of it, what you've accomplished is brilliant. And I'll tell you, this is like, whether you love or hate the realtor.coms of the world and the Zillows and the Prime Street and homes.com and all these guys, like, they're building significant models around this because of the ROI. Right? So intentionally, it's very valuable. So for you to do it and say, hey, I'm going to work my own database, and even if I trigger just 10% of the business off it, it's huge. It reshapes an organization. So this is so worth failing at, like going after and failing at. So don't be afraid to fail at. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be going. So charge after it and make it happen. That would be my biggest encouragement. Is that, go look at Zillow stock price. They're worth $10 billion for a reason. That's their market cap. I mean, there's a reason for that, right?
Absolutely. No, I love it. I mean, look, great ideas don't matter if you don't match that with execution. And I think part of execution in a lot of ways is simply just go and do it. Just go and do it. And then I think you're going to learn so much more by doing that than sitting in a room thinking about it or talking with folks about, what are the possible scenarios? What should we do? So no, I love that. So we'll open this up to questions now. I think one of the things I was going to mention to you also, we got a lot of brokerages here on the call. One of the things that we're doing here at ActivePipe, we're offering ActivePipe for leaders for the next 45 days. That's really geared towards brokerages, and it's a free account that we're doing right now, just to really simply try and help people during this time. So we'll follow up with everybody here with an email, and then you'll be able to sign up for that if you're interested there through the email communications. But I just wanted to mention that before I forgot. I guess we'll leave the next couple of minutes here. Feel free to type in any questions you have in the chat or in the Q&A. And Craig and I will do our best to address those.
Do you have any questions for me, Mike?
Normally, I'm happy to have a two-way dialogue. I think, Craig, I've learned that I just want to get you started sharing these great ideas.
Well, and I'll say this for everybody is that we've been doing this type of incubation and work for easily the past 10 years. And I'm an owner in a bunch of small little tech companies that we spooled up and found opportunity with. So this is very doable. It's very achievable. You know, and don't see this as a daunting task, but I'll tell you that it does reshape a business. Now we have, our company is, the 25 agents are really segmented into 3 categories. You have a third of the company are newer agents that are trying to figure out if they're going to make it, because obviously our academy throws off a lot of agents getting into the business. A third of the business of our company are really top producers that take advantage of our cap models and the tools and resources that we have. And then a third are agents that work that company generated resources that are working, you know, 80% of their business is being assigned by the company. So that's obviously on different splits and different scenarios. So it is a huge, huge business opportunity. It's great for recruiting. It's amazing for retention. And it's awesome for the bottom line. So there's no reason why you wouldn't want to take on this challenge. And that's why I'm so bullish on it. Yeah,
absolutely. No, totally. So we'll give everybody one more minute. It looks like they might be making this easy on us here, Craig. Don't see any questions coming in just yet. But we'll give another 30 seconds for questions, and then we'll let everybody get back to the day if not.
It's not your fault. It's my fault. I didn't have a compelling enough conversation for anybody to have any questions.
Well, either that or you just explained it that well.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, it looks like, yeah, they're making it easy. So, well, listen, again, Craig, really appreciate this, man. Well, here we go. We got one question coming in here. What has been your most successful campaign?
For us, that's a really interesting question. You know, I would tell you that our more successful campaigns are the ones that ask, when we're looking for sellers, is asking what they believe their home is worth. Gets us the most clicks, gets the most activity. It really, really is a good driver because it drives that curiosity. So when we're asking sellers about, you know, they want to know about homes that have sold in their area or what their home is worth, that ends up being a really, really good driver. The other one is, you know, the more generic questions about, hey, how can we help you? Because we have a lot of buyers that come in, and instead of trying to pigeonhole them into a box, thinking they've only submitted the one question on the one site, we really think broad, like they've been on 1,000 different sites and they've asked 1,000 different questions. So being able to meet them and saying, hey, how can we help you? Has been really, really powerful with buyers and brought a lot out of the woodworks that we just had no idea they even had any interest. There were no signals showing they had any interest, but when we stepped up and said, hey, you know, this is what we do in real estate. How can we help you? Is there anything we can facilitate for you? Is really, really a brilliant campaign.
Yeah, that's great, Greg. And honestly, I would also push everyone here to think about this a little bit even further. Like think about this outside of just a simple email or campaign. And what we consider that more the thinking of how can you think about this as taking a customer down a customer journey, and thinking about how each of the individual emails and campaigns fit into a journey. And that journey may look a little bit different for folks that have recently closed on a transaction, folks that have that just popped up in your database. But so I think that, you know, by forcing yourself to think in a little bit of a different light there, that's when you start talking about really raising your conversions and taking them to the next level. Because it's not a one-off email. It's not a one-off campaign. It's how do we take a consumer or a client down a specific path and meet them, to your words, Craig, where they are. That's where you're really going to be successful and see the best results.
Yeah, I agree.
So there's one more question here. It says, any advice for a company who's trying to expand their e-commerce department while obviously trying not to, you know, step on agents' toes in their businesses?
So I would tell you that, Nate, you're always able to find people that have either left the company or you know, we buy a lot of product line or lead source that are direct for the company versus going to the agents. So any agents that have left the company, there's an opportunity there. There's always opportunity to start buying new product lines of lead sources. And there's always companies that will sell old lead source for just pennies on the dollar. So you can always go to a lot of these lead sources and ask them for stuff that's 90 days old or 60 days old. And that's stuff that was assigned out to other agents, and they don't see them as valuable anymore. So it's a great way to start a database.
Yeah, that's great. Any other questions?
That sums it up.
Awesome. Well, Craig, really appreciate this again, man. Always great to catch up. And thank you all for joining us. And everybody have a great rest of the week.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Mike.
All right. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.